So one last thing on UCLA before we move on. You transitioned to head coaching there. There was obviously a well-documented scandal that resulted in Coach Harrick's firing. I'm not going to talk about the scandal. It's well documented, but what went through your mind when, you found out that there's a scandal, and I'm assuming, the athletic director came to you and said, you're the guy to get us through this. Like what goes through your mind as an assistant that now all of a sudden the future of UCLA is in your hands?
Yeah, very surreal, overwhelming. And, naturally UCLA was going to do a national search, which they did. So, it really was in a difficult situation with Coach Harrick, being dismissed. They go with the longest tenured assistant to be the interim coach. And I had been there for 5 seasons and a part of the national championship staff and the success that Coach Harrick had. And at that point, I also was the recruiting coordinator. And so Pete Dallas and Chancellor Young, asked me to step in as the interim coach. And they said it could be a couple weeks. It could be a month. We don't know when we're going to, find a permanent coach. And so, it started tough. We lost to Tulsa in the NIT opener at Pauley Pavilion. And that was disappointing, naturally. It was like an overtime game. And it was all surreal because it's your first time, at a press conference. It's your first practice leading a team as a head coach. It's your first exhibition game. And then it's your first, non-conference game against Tulsa in this case. And then the next thing you know, you're going against Lon Kruger at Illinois and Roy Williams, Kansas, and Charlie Spoonhour, St. Louis, Denny Crum at Louisville, and Coach K, the Duke Blue Devils, who was one of those coaches I'd been writing to in college. And then all of a sudden you're facing him at Pauley Pavilion, a sellout crowd with Dick Vitale and I think Brent Musburg calling the game for ABC. So, those were surreal, kind of pinch me and my dreaming moments. And Coach Wooden, of course, behind the bench. And that was the reason I ended up, having the interim tag lifted was, my advocate was John Wooden. And that goes back to the relationship at Purdue and those years picking him up at the airport, driving him to his hotel and bringing him over to the arena for practice, getting him to the events that he was speaking at. So you just never know. And so his advocacy behind the scenes was really important. He's not someone publicly that advocates, but having the nod, the approval of John Wooden was really important. And Chancellor Young Chancellor Young had been a young president at UCLA towards the end of John Wooden's run. John Wooden retired in 1975, and Chuck Young was there in the early 70s as a young chancellor. And Pete Dallas, the athletic director, was, in school as a football manager when Coach Wooden was at UCLA back in the day. Coach Wooden was hired in 1948. He retired in 1975, so a 27-year run with the Bruins. And Jim Milhorn, who was the number 2 athletic director, had played for Coach Wooden. Pete Blackman, the vice chancellor of the school, had also played for Coach Wooden. So if Coach Wooden doesn't advocate for me, then, probably John Calipari or Rick Majerus or Tubby Smith or, some of the other coaches that UCLA had interest in would have been hired.
Oh, wow.
So again, back to just destiny and fate and the kind of fragile nature, whether it's Tyus making that shot or missing it, and how everything moving forward would be different. And if I hadn't started my career at Purdue and met Coach Wooden, and then along with meeting Mark Gottfried and Coach Harrick, these other aspects, of course, that come into play, but all those things, play a part in leading to today. And us sitting down here and my work as a broadcaster at ABC, ESPN, and now Fox Sports and Turner and CBS during the NCAA tournament. They're, all transitions, but they're connected to these things that go back to writing letters to coaches as a sophomore in college. And that's why when I, work with young people or, speak to high school students or to college students about, their interest in certain careers, I always go back to the relationships you build and the authenticity and sincerity of those relationships. It's not networking, because I think people say, oh, so it's about networking. You go to a job fair. And I'd say, no, it's about the genuine, sincere, nature of the relationships that you build. And if you're interested in learning and you're earnest about learning, that's when magical things start to happen, because you're increasing your knowledge base and you're meeting people with life experience. And I've been fortunate that I've always had older people that I connected well with, whether it was Brent Musburger in television, Coach Katie, Coach Wooden, Coach Harrick, Pete Newell, those coaches that took time to write letters back, like Bob Knight, Mike Krzyzewski. And so both in television and in coaching, it was the knowledge that, older people with life experience shared, and their willingness to spend time and to see some potential in a young person and encourage them. So that's a big element too, that I think, we have to remember. Sometimes we need encouragement, from coaches and mentors and teachers and our parents and our friends, because we may not have the courage ourselves. And that's what encouragement is about. It's providing courage when maybe someone doesn't have it, giving them that nudge, a little motivation, inspiration to encourage them on the path, or maybe to help redirect them, because you can see more clearly than they can themselves the gifts that they have and possess, and where they might be better suited going in a different direction, a different field. And so that kind of, comes back to some of these other themes that we've been talking about today.
So can you mentioned you've gone into broadcasting. Your first job was with ESPN, correct?
Yes.
So how did you make that jump from coaching to broadcasting?
Yeah, that's interesting, because as a youngster, I had an interest in media and an interest in journalism, an interest in broadcasting. As a child, my parents got a kick out of it, but I used to listen to Larry King, Coast to Coast. It was late night radio. Before he had a television career, he would be on radio through the night and talking about sports, politics, pop culture, history, really interesting. So, and I also was fortunate. I grew up in the Bay Area with some great voices. I was a Warriors fan, and their announcer was Bill King, a Hall of Fame broadcaster, also did Raider games. Late in his career, did the Oakland A's. Lon Simmons was the voice of the 49ers and the Giants. Hank Greenwald also called Giant games. Lindsey Nelson, Red Rush, late in his career as well, was out here in the Bay Area. So I grew up, in my view, with, during a golden area of Northern California, a golden era in a golden area as well, San Francisco and Northern California. I'm a little biased in that view because I was born and raised here. But I think listening to those broadcasters, and that's before, we had the number of, sports channels and before Sports Center. And so, you'd listen to sports talk radio, you'd listen to the games, the pregame show, the postgame show. And my father was a writer, and, he actually edited a book called Action. And it was a book that was used in high schools and colleges. It was an anthology of the best sports writers in the country and their profiles on a Roger Bannister, a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a Willie Mays. He was Lou Alcindor, I think, when this article was written, but later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar when he converted to becoming a Muslim. Hank Aaron, these wonderful profiles on bullfighters. And so whether it was Jim Murray or Steinbeck on bullfighting. And so I think, for me, I was a challenge learner, but my father who was such a creative, fresh, and original thinker when it came to education, turned me on to the comics, and also brought me to a lot of foreign films because, I think the left-right brain with the subtitles, watching Fellini, Cocteau, and Truffaut, these, wonderful foreign filmmakers at a young age, and Charlie Chaplin, which had subtitles as well. And so that helped me kind of develop reading skills. And then he turned me on to the sports section and helped me with math through showing box scores. In baseball, if someone goes 3 for 10, they're hitting 300, and, shooting percentages from the foul line. And that's how he was through a 50-year career in education. Is he would look at a student, get to know that student in an authentic, genuine way, and then find really fresh, creative, lively ways to reach that student, inspire him. And so whether he was working with kids at Cal Berkeley or San Francisco State, College Marin, or prisoners at San Quentin, he taught on Monday nights at San Quentin. And that's when it was a maximum security prison back in the day. And so he just loved to teach. And it was literature, philosophy, poetry, and writing. But I think that played a part because I wanted to be a sports writer. And then, life happens. And so it's come full circle because now I am in, sports journalism and broadcasting. And so the two things I had interest in as a youngster, which was broadcasting and sports writing. I wrote for the local newspaper. I covered high school sports in the off season from basketball. So when I wasn't, playing basketball, I was covering track and field and football and baseball for the local newspaper, the Ross Valley Reporter. And I actually started corresponding with sports writers in the area, Lowell Cohn, and some other writers here, and actually was able to get to some press conferences, the 49ers press conferences, and be able to sit in on Bill Walsh being interviewed by the Bay Area media. And so at one point I thought I was going to be a sports writer or a sports broadcaster. Then coaching ended up becoming a passion. But then I returned, and that's why I've had these 2 stints in broadcasting, one with ABC, ESPN. Then I went back to coaching at St. John's, and then now Fox Sports and CBS and Turner during the NCAA tournament. So I've kind of had these intermittent sabbaticals in broadcasting and then coaching when I'm not in the broadcasting field. And they complement each other because, coaching informs a perspective that I can bring to the viewer at home when they're watching a game. And then TV informs a certain perspective because you're traveling throughout the country and you're watching other coaches prepare their teams, and you're sitting courtside for shoot-arounds and practices, and then the games themselves. And all those things inform and increase your basketball acumen, even just watching the way coaches throughout the country are utilizing their staff and seeing the new trends in terms of taking advantage of rules, whether it's a shorter clock or the 3-point line, and or recruiting and facilities, the infrastructure of seeing what people are doing in terms of locker rooms, weight rooms, and film work, and the way they scout and prepare for upcoming opponents. And then all those things you bring with you, as I did when I went back to St. John's for coaching after having that time off. And I think there's a wider angle lens when you're in television. You're seeing things at a more deliberate pace, and you're seeing things with more clarity. I was a young coach. I was 31, 32 years old when I took over at UCLA, the youngest coach in school history, youngest coach in the country at the time, or maybe second behind Steve Alford in terms of my age. So you're learning as you go, and you don't know what you don't know when you're a first-time head coach. It's like your first child, right? Versus your third or fourth child. Parents improve if they're interested and they're engaged in their children. Teachers, the first lesson plan isn't going to be, as refined or as effective as a lesson plan after 25 years in education or teaching a particular subject, whether it's history or philosophy or science or math for that matter. So you do get better. And I think broadcasting allows you to have some distance and not be so myopic. and so fully immersed on that hamster wheel in that frenetic pace that it takes to be a coach at a high level, because you're recruiting 24/7, you're putting out fires, you're working with the media, you're fundraising, you're preparing teams, you're working with players individually and collectively, and there's the psychology and mental health aspect of coaching as well, and discipline, elements that you have to deal with. And so there's a lot on the plate of a head coach in today's world, and grateful for it, extremely rewarding, but it's a lot. I think that's why you're starting to see some of these coaches step aside and retire and enjoy the remaining years they have on earth and with their family, and to be able to smell the roses, so to speak, because so often with the pace of coaching, you're not really able to fully appreciate it in the here and now. You try to be present and give thanks and be appreciative, but it's really looking back that you have a greater sense of appreciation for the opportunities you've had in a respective career.
We're running close to the end of our time, and I just want to make sure I get a chance to ask this to you before. So in 2011, I believe it was, while you were at St. John's, you were diagnosed with prostate cancer. Looks like it was kind of quiet for a while before the diagnosis went public. Like, what was going through your mind hearing that? Obviously a life-changing situation with your doctor, and how did that impact your philosophy with coaching?
Yeah, wow, that's another good question. And number one, it's another surreal moment, and naturally hit you like a ton of bricks in terms of the force of that message, that diagnosis, when you receive the call. And I definitely needed time to process. I only shared it with my wife at the time, Mary, and my mother and father. I didn't share it with anybody else, partly because I just still need to process. And then also on a practical level, after my first year, we lost, I think, 12 players, moved on, who had used their eligibility. Just an unusual, probably unprecedented at the higher levels in terms of power conference situations to have that degree of an imbalance of your roster. And so we knew that, our eyes were open that, hey, we inherited 12 seniors, but, we basically were going to be starting over in year 2, almost like an expansion team, Tampa Bay or something, the Devil Rays. And so I wanted to make sure that we signed a class first. And we were able to sign the number 3 rated class in the country, Maurice Harkless and Amir Garrett, Jakar Sampson, Don Pointer, Phil Green, D'Angelo Harrison, Norvell Pell, who was going to come, but didn't end up, arriving. There were some eligibility issues at that intersection. God's Gift was a junior college player. So we reloaded rather quickly. But I wanted to get through that season. I also didn't want our first season to be a situation where anything would take away or distract from, all of our energies being focused on the task at hand. And I thought that senior class deserved it. Norm Roberts had done a wonderful job of kind of stabilizing St. John's program. And, the next step, our responsibility being the new staff was to take the baton from Norm Roberts and move it forward and make a postseason, to make an NCAA tournament, because it had been a decade since St. John's had been in the NCAA tournament. And a wonderful group, DJ Kennedy and Paris Horn and Malik Booth and Dwight Hardy and Justin Burrell, and a number of other players. Dwayne Polee was a freshman on that team, who was, I think, California Player of the Year, LA Player of the Year. So I didn't want anything to derail, our focus, our momentum. And I thought, sharing the news of my cancer could potentially do that, given, we had our sights on trying to make an NCAA tournament, send these seniors out in a deserving fashion. And then there was that other element that I wasn't ready to share something so personal. And I was fortunate. My father had cancer, and also a quadruple and a triple bypass after a massive heart attack that he suffered in his in his 40s. And then he had a triple bypass in his 70s. So I was fortunate to have a father who had been through a great deal, and was there as a support mechanism and to kind of share his experiences with cancer. And so that was a great sounding board. And then at the end of the season, we had already signed that number 3 class in the country. And that's when, naturally I shared it with our school president, our athletic director, and then began to really roll up the sleeves and do the research on what was going to be the best treatment, for my cancer. And Peter Scardino was my surgeon, and highly recommended. He came from what's the name? It's a great school, the great Sloan Memorial Kettering, or I may have a sequence of that name out of order, but he was an outstanding doctor and saved my life. And so I'm indebted and grateful to him forever. And I'd say big picture, as you get older, life experiences, again, back to that, perspective and looking at the world through a different lens, a different prism, losing my father in 2013, shortly after my own cancer battle. I lost my dad on February 10th, 2013, right before we played Syracuse in the Carrier Dome. And then losing my mother January 25th, 2018, and the cancer, and being shown the door at St. John's after we made the NCAA tournament. All those things inform, just a different perspective. And you are grateful, to be able to get up in the morning and have a pep in your step and be able to go get a cup of coffee here in the neighborhood, and to get my steps in terms of walking, and to be able to now follow the trajectory of my UCLA players who are now 20, 25 years out of UCLA and thriving in their respective journeys, and then now watching my St. John's players who are in their late 20s and early 30s, and to follow their careers. That's really what it's about, is the relationships and wanting to participate in the dreams and aspirations of young people, just like those coaches and mentors and parents and teachers that participated in my journey and my aspirations and dreams. And so you're bringing it full circle. And to me, that's the most rewarding and important aspect of teaching and coaching and mentoring. And so I've been fortunate, been blessed, grateful for this 33-year run associated with basketball as a broadcaster and a coach. And to be able to go back and forth makes it even more unique and special. And then meeting friends like you and being able to participate with you guys today on this podcast.
Really appreciate that. So, Kate,
of course.
We're closing out on time. Do you want to pick one of the last questions from the list?
Sure. If you were to pick an animal to represent basketball, what would it be?
Wow. I'd say a deer or a cat. Okay. Deers because of their grace and the speed, the quickness. Tyus Edney was a quick cat, right? Maybe as quick as any player I've ever coached. And balance and quickness, Coach Wooden felt were the two most important words in basketball, and balance and love were the two most important words in life, in his view. Emotional balance, physical balance, and love, right, as a foundation for everything, coming from a place of love, unconditional love. And you can't go wrong with that. And in basketball, balance of, a jump stop, floor balance, offensively in terms of your spacing, defensively, your balance in transition to try and prevent teams from getting a good look before your defense gets back and gets set up. And balance of, the head between the midpoint of the 2 feet with the knees flexed, balance on your catch, whether you're inside, wanting a wide base and to be on balance, or on the 3-point line in your shot preparation, being down and ready, flexed at the knees so you're quicker in getting into your shot, and the important shot mechanics that start at the floor with the feet. So a cat, not only they have 9 lives, which is a positive, but their ability to always have their feet under them. And I think the great basketball players organize their feet, whether they're in traffic, they're maneuvering at a speed where they're still on balance. There's a fine line. Be quick, but don't hurry was another Coach Wooden phrase, because usually a turnover, a mistake, things we say that we can't take back, they're usually done in haste. Whether we're so emotional and we just say something that really could hurt someone, because words do matter. We learn that every day. And there's a greater awareness of how words hurt people, whether it's bullying or in social media. I think that balance is so important, and organizing those feet, still moving at the appropriate speed. You want to be quick again, but you don't want to be out of control. Similar to driving, right? You don't want to drive too slow. You could end up getting a ticket for that. But when merging onto a freeway, coming off a freeway, driving downtown, versus driving on the freeway, and I think with the ball in your hand, very similar to driving, you've got to be able to read the situation, see what's in front of you, look at your rear view mirror, see what's behind you. That's really a sense of where you are, court awareness. And so a deer, because of the speed and the grace, and then a cat, because of their balance and the 9 lives that they have as well, which is important, because you got to be resilient in the game of basketball and in life. And the beautiful thing about team sport is, in its purest form, it's a metaphor for life, right? It's the values and virtues, the attributes, the traits or characteristics we learn through team sport. Now, that's why we're so inspired by musicians that work, or dancers, right, that are working in concert to create something beautiful and memorable and inspiring, whether it's a symphony or it's jazz or bossa nova or hard rock. They are working together. Personally, I love R&B. And same at a musical, right? We are inspired when we get to see people work in concert, and team sports allows us to learn from athletes, and also athletes are able to learn to prepare themselves for life after sport through what they learn playing the sport. And they carry that forward for the rest of their lives. It doesn't guarantee they're going to have the life they want, or may not be happy days, or still going to be tough times. But I think the resiliency, the bounce back factor for those athletes that are navigating tough times, they have a reference point. And I think that's why sometimes, the student body at large that doesn't experience what a student athlete does isn't as well prepared. Nothing against the regular student athlete, the regular student body, but student athletes, I feel, are better prepared for life's challenges. And that's, I know in my case, what I learned from playground directors and coaches and teachers and mentors, that's really carried me forward when having difficult times, whether it's cancer or being the show in the door in coaching, or having a tough loss. How you respond is so important. And that goes back again to the cats landing on their feet and being alert, and their overall awareness, even when they're taking naps, those whiskers, that they have to help in terms of their alertness. So that's what you want on defense, that alertness, to be down, flexed, coiled. And so there you have it, a deer and a cat. If we could combine those two, we'd have the perfect basketball player, which is probably DeAndre Ayton. He's about as good as it gets. I've said before, if God created a basketball player, it would be DeAndre Ayton. In terms of his grace, his length, his feel, his touch, his presence, his poise, his athleticism, his temperament and bearing. I think he is really special.
That is the most well thought out answer to one of Kate's questions we've heard since doing this show.
That's called a riff. Right? You allow for a riff in jazz. You got to allow for the riff, right? The Isley Brothers on the electric guitar. You got to let the gifted ones riff.
Oh man, so I think that's a good way to close out the episode. Kate, that was not one of the questions I was suggesting, but hey, I think that worked out even better. So.
Good. I love it. Yeah, mix it up. I'm a big fan of Animal Planet and the Nature Channel. And my players, if any of them watch this podcast, will get a kick out of it, because on a continual basis, I would use examples from the animal kingdom and use it in terms of how it's applicable to sport. I'll give you a quick one. To get your arms up and out, like the antlers, right? Because you want to take up space. And when you're playing defense or offense, you want to get those antlers like the branches on a tree, get them up and out. They help you get deflections. It helps you contest shots. It prevents, offensive teams from window shopping and playing over the top of your defense. Get the antlers up and out, So I think, even just, we talked about cats, but the tigers and lions too, in terms of that, if you're in your stance, right, you got to be flexed and coiled and ready to pounce on a loose ball or to convert from offense to defense or defense to offense. Either way, conversion, both mentally and physically, is really important. And if you watch Animal Planet or Nature Channel, you're watching some cats that are down, flexed, and coiled like Crouching Tiger, a good film, by the way. Yeah. We'll get into cinema some other podcast.
We'll spin off and start a cinema series.
There we go. We'll get our own Siskel Ebert thing going on. Love it. Yeah.
So, on that note, Coach Lavin, thank you so much for spending your time. This is we're recording this on a Saturday afternoon. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us. It's been really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, and you guys are a good team. You guys have got a good rapport, even though you're in separate locations, right? Phoenix and Chicago, and I'm here in San Francisco, so there's some triangle there. But I enjoyed the questions and your authenticity. We talked about authenticity earlier, and also you're good listeners, because I've chatted quite a bit here on this podcast. Appreciate
it. Yeah. And if the Pac-12 network comes to ASU this year, I'll try to swing by and say hello. So please do. And even if you come through LA or come through San Francisco, the invitation is there for both you two. I'm a good concierge. I can take you on some hikes, some walking trails. They're outstanding here, and some good haunts in terms of restaurants, and some hole in the wall bars for a couple of beverages as well, a couple of root beers. Yeah. Do you play golf? I don't play golf, but I go to tournaments for good causes. Coaches vs. Cancer, different fundraisers, and I'm usually put in charge of one hole, or I'm beverage director, or handing out cigars and beverages. And I'm like the social director / beverage and cigar director for these. There was a great one, Cube, Coalition United for Black Enterprise, that I attended in Novato, the golf course in Marin County. And the proceeds go to, Black businesses that are either struggling right now, or they've got potential and they just need some funding. But I don't swing the clubs, and never really never had an interest in it. But I do love being outdoors and getting the fresh air and engaging with golfers and watching them be frustrated, and getting a kick out of that instead of having to go through the frustration myself. I know it's during the season, but if you can spare time to go to the Phoenix Open up in Scottsdale, it's nothing like you've ever experienced. If you've ever been to a PGA golf tour, it's the complete polar opposite, but it's an amazing time. I love the Royal Palms, Scottsdale, Phoenix area. It might be Scottsdale, I forget where exactly it is, but Tempe, but it's a great, beautiful property. So when I would go over and visit Earl Watson when he was coaching the Phoenix Suns, I think the Final Four was there a couple years back. That might have been the year Villanova won it, when Jenkins hit the shot. That might have been in Phoenix. But I stay at the Royal Palms, giving them a little plug, so maybe they'll give us a break on the rate if we end up staying there. Awesome. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I'm getting texted by my wife. I thought you said you were gonna be done at 4, but hey. Ooh, don't get her on. Don't get on the wrong side of your wife. Sorry, Kate. You need to talk her down. This is on. Just
blame me. She doesn't get mad at me.
Yeah, she will not get mad at you. Peacemaker. Exactly. It was the question about the animals. There's your out. Yeah. I love that question though. The way it works is Kate makes fun of me. I make fun of Kate. Kate texts my wife. My wife comes and yells at me. It's this endless circle now. That's teamwork. There's a certain degree of teamwork there, right? Helping one another navigate scenarios or circumstances that are less than ideal. That's why you guys are a good fit. Appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and actually wrap it up this time. So check us out at stadiumscene.tv, at Stadium Scene on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and TikTok, and at stadium_scene on Instagram. And we will see you next time.